The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod and I am so thrilled to be here this morning. We're going to talk about a topic that's going to get a little squeamy. So I'm trying to be in as upbeat of a mood as I can possibly be because it is, for most of us, it's going to get a little squeamy. And that's okay. Sometimes we got to talk about the squeamy stuff. So let me first of all welcome you. As I said, I'm Shannon Penrod. I identify as a proud pony. And I always do a thing with my head because I like to think of me having a ponytail that I do not have. PONY stands for Parent of Neurodiverse Individual. Those are the words that my son has given me to talk about our relationship to each other and our relationship to the word, to the community of autism, not the word of autism, the community that is neurodivergent, neurodiverse, and the autism community. Those are all the words. I know that many of you use different words, and I want you to know that here at Autism Live, we have a real penchant for wanting to create a space, a safe space in which individuals can pick the words to describe themselves that they think that are appropriate. I mean, if there's anything we can do is say to people, how do you want to identify, right? And then we try to comply with that as best as we can. Sometimes we don't get that right, like the rest of the world, but we want to be trying. So that's what I want to say about that. Here at Autism Live, and in fact, the entire Autism Network, our mission is to provide information and inspiration. And we want to provide that, first of all, to individuals who are themselves on the spectrum, who identify as being neurodivergent, as being autistic, having autism, all of those things. But in addition to those folks who are the beating heart of our community, we really want to provide that information and inspiration to all the individuals who love those individuals, right? We feel that that's a big, robust community of people and that together we may not have a lot of things in common, but we do, I think we all agree on the rights of individuals with autism and have compassion and caring for them and want to help to create a world in which it would be all of us loving individuals on the autism spectrum. Good morning, Rodney. So thrilled that you're here. Rodney brings up a point for me that we are live right now. Today is Wednesday. It is it the 16th? Oh my gosh, it's the 16th. We're in the second half of October, which is a little nutty. How time flies, but I love this time of year. I don't know about all of you. It's been so hot here in Los Angeles for way too long. And the weather has broken this week. I suspect we will have another heat wave next week, but if we do, it will be the last of the year, please. But it's just nice. It's been cool and crisp and a little bit gray, overcast. If you live in LA and it's sunny every day, sometimes you just live for a day like today where it's overcast. So thrilled about that, but there's a crisp in the air. That means Halloween is just a little ways away. And you know what that means? Thanksgiving is around the corner. And welcome Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa. Love it all. So, which also reminds me, we're working very hard on the toy guide, and I'll be giving you more information about that. The winners are chosen. We have not announced it yet, but we are working on the toy guide, and it will go live in November. And we hope you guys will check out all the amazing toys and gifts that we have chosen this year. So, all right, I got all down a side alley. But I want to come back to the fact that we're live right now on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Our fabulous Chris Desmond will at some point show you on the screen. There it goes, iHeartRadio, all the different ways that you can be listening to the show, all the different ways that you can be watching the show. Now, obviously, if you're watching us live, you're probably watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. And we really appreciate, like Rodney, when you write in and say hello. We love to know what's going on with you. You can ask a question at any point. Today, I don't have a guest. We're doing a parent-to-parent talk about compliance the right way, which I think is a very important conversation for everyone to have. Both How do we gain compliance, but how do we do it the right way? I think they're keys to happy, safe life, right? But we love to have you write in about any topic. I'm here and love to be here with you. For those of you who are listening in podcasts, and we know that that is most of you, we hope that you are enjoying the free download wherever you get your podcasts. It is free to you, but it is not free to us. So we defray that cost. We don't want you to pay for it, but so we have sponsors. I hope you're embracing them. If you really want to have an ad-free podcast, you can do that. You can go to glow.fm, like Frank and Mary, /autism-live. And when you go there, it's just $5 a month. And that means that you have subscribed to all of the podcasts that Autism Network does, including Autism Live, including Ask Dr. Doreen, and everything else that we do. You'll get all the toy guide stuff. It will show up as soon as we broadcast something, it will show up in your inbox without ads for a mere $5 a month. So that's a pretty good deal. I hope that you enjoy that in whichever, but if you prefer to listen to it and embrace the ads, boy, then it's free for you. So whichever category you're in, we hope that you're enjoying the content. Please like, share, comment, forward it to people, post about us. I know that there are many of you who do that, and I so appreciate it, because every time you do that, 1 or 2 or 100 more people find us. And that's really what we're about here, is being a place. I was on the phone with somebody last night, and they were talking to me about my book and saying, my book came out at the end of the pandemic, and I didn't end up doing a book signing. I didn't end up doing a whole lot of press and things like that. And the person was saying to me, you really got to do that. And I said, here's what I know. We do the show, and I did the book because if people want to find the information, I want it to be in a place where they can find it. I don't want to hit them over the head with it. I don't want to force anybody to think or do anything. But if somebody's looking for the information, I want them to be able to find it. And I don't want money to be a deterrent from being able to find this information. So we've been doing this for 14 years. You know what I'm saying, 14 years. And we still, it's funny, when I first got asked to do a radio show about autism, I was like, well, what would you do? I said, well, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to try to write out 10 cards about topics that I would do shows about. And if I can have at least 10, then I will say yes to doing the radio show. And when I got to 50, I was like, okay, clearly I need to say yes. And, here we are 14 years later. And that was the radio show that I did for 2 years before coming and doing this. So we're 16 years down the road, and we still have things to talk about, right? New things to talk about. So anyway, I hope you're watching. I hope you're liking. I hope you're sharing with other people. We love reviews on iTunes. Boy, that's like the best Christmas gift you can give us here, because that means that a lot of new people get to see us. So anyway, I really want to get to today's topic because it's huge. We're going to go through it quickly, but I'm going to really ask you to stay for the longer talk of it, because there's a lot of nuance to this. And I want to give a disclaimer before we do anything, that I think that if you ask any parent what they want for their child, I think what we want are happy, safe, healthy children that we have a connection with, right? Is there anybody that's like, nah, that's not really what I want? And I think that part of that feeling a connection is trust, where if you say to your child, come here, that your child would come here. There is something about that that is comforting to us and to them, because it speaks about a bond and about trust. And the lack of that, if you say to the child, come here, and the child doesn't come here, it doesn't mean that the trust and the connection isn't there, but it does place a question on how much of a connection have we gotten to, whether that's right or not. I'm saying from a parent's gut, you feel like, I don't have something that I really want to have. And it's not just about the ego of, I want to say come here and for my child to come here. I think most parents think about, if I'm someplace and, there's natural disasters all the time. Think about these families that just went through the hurricanes. And at some point, saying to a child, come here, and having them come here might be the thing that saves their life. So it's really supercharged stuff that we're going to talk about. So we want compliance. We all want compliance. Compliance is sometimes a dirty word, and people go, oh, well, all you want are compliant children. I don't think that that's all anybody wants. But for safety and trust and connection, I think we all do want compliant children. But we want compliant children to be the right kind of compliant, which means that there is trust between us and we trust each other, but there is also trust in the child that they trust themselves. And that if somebody is asking them to do something that they don't want to do, that they won't do it. This is a very, very hard line. And we're going to be going, back and forth on this throughout the whole time. But I do believe that there is a way to gain good compliance and to do it in the right way so that your child is still a person unto themselves and can advocate for themselves and have the ability to say no. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Let's buckle up. It's not going to be as black and white as we all want it to be, because there's a lot of gray area here, but it's worth talking about for the sake of our children and their safety on both sides. So let's get started. I'm going to go through them really quickly so that you get a feel for what we're going to talk about, and then I'm going to go through them more in depth. So number one, if you want to gain compliance with your children, it's actually a fairly easy thing to do. Doing it the right way is slightly harder. But gaining compliance is really about a couple of different steps, and one of them is catching them do good. Anytime you see your child doing something wonderful, you want to make sure that you're praising them and telling them that they're doing a good job. Now, praise is one thing, and there are a lot of other ways that we can, and I'll talk more about that when we get to that part. Number two, teach your child boundaries and reinforce them. This is critical and important if you're going to teach compliance in the right way, because compliance should not be carte blanche. Let's go on to number three. Up the praise. If you're wanting a child who's listening and trusting you, praise them more. I'll explain why when we go through this long one. Before, model having boundaries. You need to show your child the boundaries that you have so that they see you do them. Number five, make it fair. Doesn't Dr. Grampy Shea talk about this all the time? That if we're asking the child to do something, it has to be fair. Number six, set boundaries for people who are around your child. And until your child can set the boundaries for themselves, it is critical that we do that. Number seven, stick up for your child's boundaries always. I think we're going to talk more about this, but I think it goes without saying, right? Always. Number eight, teach your child about levels of friendship, that all friendships are not the same. This is really complicated and touchy stuff, but this is critical. And I'll tell you the story of how when they were teaching my child levels of friendship, it taught me how to have boundaries. Woo, that was powerful. Okay, number nine, give your child choices always, always, even when the two choices are things they don't want to do. And number 10, listen to your child's cues. Your child will be telling you things all the time. I know some of you have kiddos that you're like, but Shannon, my child doesn't speak. My child doesn't make eye contact. I don't know what my child's cues are. We're going to talk about what the cues are for everybody and how you can be tuning in to what they're actually telling you, because that is critical. Absolutely critical. Okay, let's go back to the beginning now. And let's talk about this catch them doing good. So if you want to teach compliance to anyone, a child on the autism spectrum, a child not on the autism spectrum, a 14-year-old, a 37-year-old, a 67-year-old, the way we teach compliance to someone is that we give them a reason to be compliant, right? And in the beginning, what you want to do is catch them doing something that you have an opportunity to praise them for, because we're laying down the groundwork of the fact that, I care what you do. And if I make it worth your while, you will now care how I react to what you do. And that is how we gain compliance. So I'm going to give an example here. Let's say the one story that I always remember is the woman who said to me, she said, but my child never does anything right. My child never ever does anything right. And I said, well, that can't be entirely true, right? It's just that they're doing an awful lot of things that are driving you crazy. But your child sometimes they're always breathing, right? And that's a good job. You're doing a good job breathing. And sometimes this pattern of always looking for what is wrong, we all get into it. So you have to start by forgiving yourself. If you're sitting there going, yep, that's my child doesn't do anything right, my child doesn't listen to anything that I say, I want you to literally put your arms around yourself and hug yourself and say it's going to be okay. There's a wonderful Tony Robbins exercise that he does with a room full of people where he says to them, I want you to look around the room and I want you to see everything that's blue. Check it out. Everything in the room that's blue, notice, because we're going to quiz you in a moment, look and really notice all the things that are blue in the room. And then he goes, okay, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to picture all the things that are brown in the room. And it's a real, mind messer upper because you were picturing all the blue things in the room. And he says, I want you to really visualize all the things that are brown in the room, and you're kind of convinced that there is very minimal brown in the room. You open your eyes, and it's like brown assaulting you. There's brown everywhere, right? But you weren't tuned into that because you were looking for the blue. So I'm going to ask you as a parent, you've been tuned into the blue, which is my child is doing a lot of things that are really kicking my can, but now I want you to tune into the brown. What is your child doing that is actually good? And it can be like a game that you play with yourself about absolutely everything that they are doing good. You will find something, even if it is just that they are breathing, right? And there are lots of ways to praise a child. And you really want to be thinking about what is your child's love language? What are the things that you see them reacting to? And we are going to talk about a child's cues later on in more depth, but there are lots of ways that a child shows us, I like that. And one of them is that if they like the way you praised, they will do the thing again and again and again because they liked the praise that they got. Now, for some kids, that's a hug. For other kids, they like to have their hair ruffled or their arms. The therapists do the spaghetti arms with them where they hold their arms and do this with them. Some kids like that, or to be rocked, or some kids love eye contact. Some kids don't, right? Some kids already love praise. Whatever your child loves now, I always say put the praise with it, because it's called pairing, and you're just putting praise because eventually the praise will be enough. They will start to really love the praise. Now, I know that there are people who are going to be watching going, yeah, but this is dangerous ground because if you make the child really dependent on praise, then anybody can praise them. That's why we're doing this talk. It's important as a parent that you are having this relationship. The answer to saying, well, but anybody could do this with them is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, I'm not going to praise them then. You're going to raise a child who's desperate for praise. So we're going to start with us, and then once we have trust with our child, then we're going to teach them how to advocate for themselves so that they aren't fodder for all the bad people in the world. And there are bad people in the world. I wish there weren't, but there are. But let's have this trust in this bond with our child for us so that we can lay that groundwork and we can teach the other things. Okay, so you catch them doing good and you have some sort of a reinforcer for that. It can be praise, it could be the hugs, it can be all kinds of things. I encourage people for this not to make it a food thing. Food is a primary reinforcer, and you'll hear a lot of behaviorists that give them a jelly bean. I want to say that I just like that. I want to save that for things that we can't get any other way. Food is a very reinforcing thing, and it's a primary reinforcer, so it's going to be reinforcing to almost everybody. But it's a little cheap to me, and I want to, it's both cheap and expensive. I want to save it for things that I absolutely need that primary reinforcer. I don't think you need it for catching them doing something good in order to get them to do more of it. And I don't know. I'm a very food dependent person, and I didn't want to raise a child that was food dependent. You know what I'm saying? Oh, Angela's saying, please do a topic about autism and epilepsy. Such a struggle for the last year. Beloved is 23 right now. I absolutely will put that on the list of things to talk about. But I want you to know that a lot of people are having a lot of success with the ketogenic diet for epilepsy. And let me know if that's something you've already tried. Hi, Angela. I love your starburst there. So, okay. So back to catching them doing something good. If we catch them doing something good. By the way, the mom that I was talking about, there's like, she doesn't do anything that's good. And we started talking about, well, what is he particularly drawn towards? And she said, he's obsessed with the remote to the television, and we don't let him have the remote to the television. And I said, what would happen if you handed him the remote and asked him to put it on a channel for you? And she said, well, we never do that. And I said, what would happen if you did do that? And she said, well, he'd put it on the channel for me. I said, and then you could praise him for that. And then what would happen? And she was like, I don't know. The earth might fall apart. Right? Right? Because it feels that way. It feels like, well, I don't know what would happen. But anyway, she did that. She handed the child the remote and said, can you put this on channel 4 for me? And the child was like, you gave me the remote? The remote is like the promised land. I've been wanting the remote all this time, and you gave it to me and asked me to put it on a channel. He put it on channel 4 for her, and she said, thank you so much. I so appreciate your help with that. And he gave her back the remote and started going doing other things. She was like, I don't know what happened. I have a different child now, because we created an environment in which they could win, that they could contribute, that they could be important, that they could do something good, right? We want to create that environment for our children. So you can catch them doing good, or you can ask them to do something that they already want to do. But the key here is that you have to give them some sort of a reinforcer that is meaningful to them. For some kids, it is praise. For some kids, it's attention. For some kids, it's a touch or a feeling, right? So knowing what makes your child happy is it's not absolutely essential to start, right? But if you do know and you give that reinforcer, you're already 3 steps ahead. If you don't know, you're going to try different things and say, did the behavior change? Did I see more compliance after I was doing that, right? Catch them doing something good. It is powerful. Okay, let's move on to number 2. But once we are starting to work on compliance, we have to do the flip. And this is what I talk about, the right way to teach compliance. We have to teach your child boundaries and reinforce them. Now, here's where it gets really dicey, because we all have the upbringing that we had, right? And sometimes that is so ingrained in us that we don't realize we could choose something else. And you can. You can choose something else for your child. And we go in phases, a society does, where we say, here is what's appropriate. Like, when I was a child, nobody talked about any boundaries for having to do with anything, right? Wish they had. But when I was a little bit older, and I remember that there were younger kids in our family, the thing that was popular in society right then was that what we would say to all the kids is, nobody gets to touch you where your bathing suit covers. Nobody is allowed to touch you there. And if anybody tries to touch you where your bathing suit is, you can tell them no. Well, that's setting up a boundary. By the time my son was born, I remember going to a workshop. Oh my gosh. It was a workshop that was all about how to prevent your child from being, identified by a predator. And it was a very hard workshop to be at. But one of the things that the woman who was leading the presentation said was, this bathing suit thing is just not good enough. Why are we allowing our child to think that anybody can touch their hair? Anybody can touch their feet, can touch their hands. That's their body. Why aren't we teaching them That's your body, and nobody gets to touch your body unless you say it's okay. And why aren't we doing this at a very early age? And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, why aren't we teaching that? So I encourage all of you to think about what's appropriate for you and what's appropriate for your child. But if you think like me, it's like, well, nobody should be touching them. Now, obviously, there are some times when we need to be talking to our child goes to the doctor. I don't know about you, but every time that my child went to the doctor, I would say, now that, the doctor is going to touch you here, there, or wherever, I'm right here. Are you okay with that? I asked that when my son wasn't verbal. And we noticed how he reacted, right? He didn't have the ability to say no at that point, but we were working really hard on the no. But children vote with their hands and their feet too. And, he let us know physically that he understood what was happening and he was okay with it. And if your child can't and won't and isn't able to do that, it becomes a real concern about, should we be allowing the dentist to have their hands in their mouth? Should we be allowing for different things to be touched? And you get into ethical conversations that you have to decide for yourself with your child. But I do think it's important that we recognize this is a human being who has thoughts and feelings, and the memory of this is not going to go away. And I have had a couple of parents that have made the decision with something that was medical, that the child was clearly saying, I don't want, either verbally or physically, right? And where we got to the point with restraints, and those kids are now adults and they remember it, and it was not okay. And it becomes traumatic. So I really want you to consider, obviously there are circumstances in life that can become life-threatening where your child needs to be examined, but I want you to be cognizant of what you're saying yes to on behalf of your child when you're noticing their cues and how they're voting, right? Because it's important that your child get to have boundaries. And when they come into the world, they don't have any boundaries, right? They are just these, mewling, screaming little love bugs that, we're putting into a burrito and holding them. But it's not, I don't think it's ever too early to talk to a child about having a boundary. They may not fully be able to understand what you're saying, but to talk to them about it, but then to notice if they don't like something. It just makes me absolutely crazy. Sometimes you'll see somebody who is just likes to tease a child. I can't remember where I was recently, but somebody kept poking the child, and I just about came out of my skin. And I finally said something. It wasn't good what I said. I wish I could remember where it was, but they kept poking the child, and I said something really loudly. You poke that child again, and I'm going to poke you, and you're going to remember it for a long time. Do you know what I mean? But I don't know why there are people who feel like that's appropriate. There's always some aunt or uncle or somebody who really, really thinks that that's hilarious. I don't think that's hilarious, and I think we all have a right and have really an obligation to stick up for everyone around us, that we don't allow that kind of thing to happen, but especially our kids, right? So you're going to teach your child whatever boundaries you feel are appropriate and that they can understand, and then you're going to reinforce them. And we're going to drill on this a lot of these, but this is the groundwork of it. And it starts with whether your child is vocal or not, we want to make sure that the child has the ability to express a hard no. And this is hard. And if you are someone who does not feel empowered to say a hard no, it's harder to teach. So we start with ourselves. And I want you to practice saying no to people when you need to say no. And this is tough because if you need to for a while, you can say no, thank you. But try not to offer an excuse. Try not to put a but in the conversation, right? No, but just say no. and see what that is like. It is a little off-putting if you're not used to it, and I think a lot of us aren't used to it. Let's go on to number 3. Up the praise. Now, this is another critical part of gaining any compliance. I'm going to speak a little bit about Hank Moore, who is the COO of the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. So years and years ago, Christina Adams wrote a book called A Real Boy, and I really encourage you guys to read it. I read this book. Logan Shepard's mother gave me this book, and it became my Bible. I took it with me everywhere. I read it cover to cover like 5 times. It was so war-torn because I took this book everywhere with me. And in it, Christina tells the story of when her son was going through his early intervention at CARD, and her supervisor was a young Hank Moore, and apparently he had long flowing hair. He does not anymore. But she would talk about, well, we saw this behavior and I didn't know what to do, so I called Hank. And Hank said this. And I did this and I didn't know what to do next. So I talked to Hank, I met with Hank, and Hank said, do this. And it just seemed like Hank had all the answers. And all I could think was, I really got to meet Hank. And I came to CARD and I didn't meet Hank. And I would always ask, where's Hank? And they were like, Hank works at a remote office. It was years. My son had graduated from CARD when I finally went into a conference room once. I was working at CARD then, and went into a conference room, and they introduced me. And they said, oh, this is Hank. Have you met Hank? And I went, Hank? Hank? Is it Hank? My Hank? Hank Moore? Burst into tears. Everybody in the conference room went, what just happened? But a lot of people have this reaction about Hank after they read this book. Now, one of the most famous things that Hank Moore says is, if you're having problems with compliance, up the praise. Now, the first time I was in the room and Hank said this, I was like, I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't understand what you're saying. And he said, you don't have to understand it. Just try it. Just try it. If your child is not complying with what you're saying, find every opportunity that you can to praise them. Don't praise them for something. Again, this goes right back to hand in hand with catching them doing something good. But it's really about praise. And he was like, just try it. It's like a new toy. It's a magic trick. But if your child is not good with compliance, find every opportunity in a day. You really compel yourself, challenge yourself to find, 40 things today that you can praise them for, and see how your day is. And I offer this challenge up to you because, first of all, your day will be better. You personally will feel better because when we are finding, it's that blue thing, right? The blue and the brown thing. When we're finding things to praise in someone, we feel better. We just do. But you will see a change in your child. By the way, this works with just about anybody. Somebody's giving you agita right now, praise them and see if the dynamic shifts. But for our kiddos, listen, they're amazing. And we should be telling them that every opportunity that we get. I always think of I've said this before, as a teacher, I always thought of our kids as empty buckets. And you're putting things into the bucket. You're putting attention into the bucket, and you're putting self-esteem into the bucket. I just don't think that you can put too much self-esteem in the bucket, and praise is part of self-esteem. It's not the whole game, but it's certainly a part of it. So up the praise, and you will see that magically compliance happens. So that's number 3. Let's move on to number 4. I mentioned before the thing about saying no. It's so critical that we demonstrate for our children that we have boundaries, that we are people too, that we have sensory issues, that we have things that we don't want to do. I don't think I really got this when my son was little, that I think I assumed, and it's so crazy to me now to think of this, that because he couldn't talk to me, that there were big concepts and big ideas that he just was missing and that he wasn't paying attention to. Because it didn't seem like he was paying attention to it. And what I have discovered now that he's an adult and he's fully verbal is he was totally paying attention. He was noticing things on a level that I don't notice things. He was taking in data in every cell of his body and noticing how I was reacting to things. I thought that he was not in tune with me at all. He was way, way, way in tune with me. And if I had had that knowledge back when, I would have paid much more attention to what I modeled for him. Because some of the best things that I didn't do consciously that I modeled, he has taken on for himself. That, my ability to get to a part in a problem where it's just exhausting and it seemed a project that never seems like it's going to end. And then years ago, he said to me, how do you do that? How do you continue on? And I didn't really understand, and he had to clarify for me. I was painting a room in our house and it was just wearing me out and it needed 2 more coats and I was just exhausted and I didn't want to. And he said, can you teach me, how do you do that? Can you teach me how to do that? And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, you always have the ability. I see you get to a point and you're struggling with it and it seems like she's not going to be able to go on. And he said, and then something shifts and you get it done. Like, what is that you're doing? And I was able to verbally explain to him in my mind what I do in those moments. But he had noticed the behavior. I didn't even notice the behavior that I did that. But he noticed it. He also noticed when I was having anxiety attacks. And he started having anxiety attacks as a child because he saw me doing it. And I heard him. The reason why I started doing cognitive behavioral therapy is that I would start to have an anxiety attack. We would go someplace and I would be pushing on my stomach and be like, oh, because I just needed to calm down. And I was like, oh, having a panic attack. I was afraid it was a heart attack. And I would turn to my husband and say, I need to go home. I need to go home. I feel like I'm dying. And then when I heard my 5-year-old say that, I was like, well, he said exactly that phrase. I need to go home. I feel like I'm dying. And I went, what have I taught him? What have I taught him? And went into cognitive behavioral therapy to deal with my anxiety. So let's model the best behavior. Let's not model that behavior, right? Although if you're having panic attacks and you have ways to resolve it, please model that, right? Don't just leave them hanging with just the panic attack. So we're going to model having boundaries. We're going to model self-care. We're going to model good self-talk. Instead of saying, oh, I just can't do it, saying, I know I can do it, right? Because they are listening and they are paying attention and they're absorbing so much more than I think we could ever realize. So model having boundaries. Let your child see you say to somebody, oh, I'd prefer not to hug. Woo! People are saying this all the time now. When I was a child, this was unheard of, that you would say, no, thank you. I don't want to hug. Right. I have a thing right now where people want to touch my phone. What's that about? Why do you want to touch my phone? I'll be doing something and I'll be in an app at a store and I'll be like, I can't find the thing. And they start grabbing my phone away from me. And I've started saying to people, I'm sorry, I prefer that you not touch my phone and just tell me where to go. And boy, people don't like that. Right? Because this is my phone. You should not touch it. But I model that behavior, that's my boundary. And people don't always like boundaries, and yet I still hold the boundary because that's important. Practice your boundaries, whatever's appropriate for you, in front of your children so that they see that even though it feels uncomfortable and even though the other person gets a little fatootsed, life goes on. Nobody's dead. There's no blood, right? Model having those behaviors. Let's move on to number 5. And thank you, Angela. Making it fair. Oh my gosh. So often when we're talking about compliance, it's important to sit down and think to yourself, what is it that I'm asking the child to do and what is in it for them? I need a tissue. I have a family member who I absolutely love, and they have an extraordinary child who is so capable and can do so many things. But I remember very distinctly when that child was 2.5, and that mother was upset that she was not able to clean her entire room by herself. And I can totally understand why the mother thought that there was a reason that their child could clean their room, because this child was exceptional and so bright and so brilliant, and at 2.5 could load a dishwasher, which is unusual. You know what I'm saying? But that doesn't mean that she can clean her own room by herself. That's an even higher skill than loading the dishwasher. So it's not fair. It's not fair what was being asked of this little girl. And it's not fair to be frustrated when she's not able to do it. Now, it's hard sometimes when we have kids on the spectrum because we don't know. And the question I was asking myself, is it that he can't do it, or does he not know how to do it? Is it that this autism, this disability that they have told me that he has, is preventing him from doing it? And by my pushing him to do it, I'm asking him to do something that he literally cannot do? Or is it just that he is not old enough to have this skill, and he's not old enough to learn this skill? These are all important questions because it's part and parcel of making it fair. In my son's first year of school, when they did the first IEP, it's so good that I can laugh about it now. But they had it in his IEP that the goal was by the end of his kindergarten year that he would be able to sit in circle time for an hour without interruption, without being distracted. And I was like, what? Like, on what planet is that appropriate? That's not fair. Do you have any kindergartners who are able to sit for an hour with their hands in their lap? That's bad compliance. I don't want that, right? So we constantly have to be asking, what is it that I want compliance, but what have I asked my child to do? And what is in it for them? And is it fair? If I'm asking them to do something like, put their shoes by the front door, I know why I want that, because then we'll know where they are when it's time to go and I won't trip over them. There's a whole bunch of things in it for me. What's in it for them? What is the paycheck for the child in putting the shoes on the mat by the front door? Because I'm going to tell you, if there's nothing in it for them, it's not fair to ask them to do it. It's just forcing compliance. Now, if you want to be a tiger mom, and listen, a couple of years ago, we had a lot of that, right? With the tiger moms and the tiger dad saying, I don't allow my child to have a blanket when they sleep. They have to earn the blanket. And if you want that kind of relationship with your child, heaven knows you can have it. But they've interviewed tiger mom and tiger dad's children, and they're adults and don't want to have anything to do with their parents and feel that they were traumatized. I'm not interested in that. I have a very strong feeling that you're not interested in that, right? But sometimes it gets dicey, and we're not taking the child's blanket away. But when we say, I really need you to put your shoes by the front door, if our child had the ability to talk, they might go, why? Why is that so important to you? Why does that matter to you so much that you would be angry with me about it? I remember very distinctly there was a time when we were living in these terrible condos because we had no money. I would pick my child up from school, and there was no parking at the condo. You had to park on the street, and there were people who would fly down the street. And there had been accidents, and there had been children who had been hit by cars. Like, there was a reason why I was afraid for my child. And you had to park so close to the curb so that your car didn't get hit, that there was no way to get out on the passenger side. And so I would get out of the car, but then I would go over and open the back passenger door behind the driver to try to get my son and his backpack out of the car and onto the sidewalk before either of us got hit by a car. It was very stressful for me. And he would just dilly-dally, and he would take his time, and he would drop something, and I would be in fear that we were going to die. And I even had our ABA team work on it about, let's get everything in your backpack before we go to get out of the car, and let's hurry to see how we can quickly, safely get out of the car. And we worked on it. It never was as fast as I needed it to be for my fear. And I'll never forget the day that my son said, you just have to do it my way. You just have to do it fast, and you have to get to the sidewalk. And he said to me, why? And I said, because I need it that way. And he said, oh, do you have autism? And I realized in that moment, I was being very inflexible about it. And then I stopped, acknowledged what my fear was. I talked with him about it. I said, I just don't want you to get hit by a car. I don't want me to get hit by a car, and I don't want the car to be hit by a car. But most importantly, I don't want you to be hit by a car. And then I'm trying to think, he was like 7, maybe 8 years old at that point. We were able, because he understood what the priority was and what was at stake, then we were able to work on it together in a way that suited his measurement of time, not hurrying, because that made him nervous. And my fear of being hit by the car, we were able to figure it out. Like, for instance, that he could, give me the backpack through the window of the passenger door. Like, it wasn't that hard. We were able to figure it out. So we make it fair. We make it fair. Angela, I want to know, what do you say? What are you saying? I can't do that now. Is it the boundaries for yourself? I don't know at what point you wrote that in, Angela. It's hard. It's hard if that's the thing. I'm still not good at it, but I practice it. So, but because we're also, speaking of making it fair, things have to be fair for us. So we can have more boundaries. We make it fair for us, make it fair. Oh, I can't sit. Oh, I see what you're saying. I can't sit for an hour. I can't either. If I have to sit and hear a lecture, I got to have other things going on. I got to have a piece of paper so I can doodle. Everybody thinks I'm a great note taker. Woo, I can't sit still that long. So I hear you. I absolutely hear you that. So it wouldn't be fair for a 4-year-old who's in kindergarten, would it? Anyway, we're making it fair. Making it fair for ourselves and for our kiddos. And when we make it fair and we're asking for compliance for something, I remember we went through something really traumatic that I love fireworks. And at the time we were living in Santa Clarita, and they had the big fireworks at the mall in Santa Clarita. And we went and sat. It's just this crazy thing that people line up on the sides of this 6-lane road right outside the mall. We were on the other side, and the traffic is just barreling down. And you have to go and sit hours before they shut the traffic down. And my husband and I both were sitting there with our child, panicking the whole time for fear that a car was going to come up on the sidewalk, or that our son was going to get up and lunge into traffic. I mean, it's just unthinkable to me now that we were sitting there. But they shut down the fireworks at certain lanes when the fireworks start. The fireworks started, and it got into the finale. And in the middle of the finale, 2 cars crashed at pretty good speed, and a car went flying into the crowd, like maybe 20 feet from us. And, people were killed. It was very traumatic. And I'll tell you, there was counseling for a lot of people. It was really devastating. And it really made me think, because in the moment, as the car was, we saw the car airborne coming towards us, and depth perception, we couldn't tell where it was going to land. But my husband reacted very quickly, and he grabbed our child and pulled him back. And because we had good trust with our child didn't fight him in doing that. I reacted a little bit slower. And so my husband got back on the sidewalk. Then he reached back, grabbed me, and pulled me out of the way. We were far enough away that it didn't really matter. But it was one of those moments when I realized that I needed to say to my son, there were a lot of other things that were happening in the world, like shootings and things like that. And I said to him, if I ever say to you, get down or move over here or do this, I want you to know that you have the right to ask me. But if you hear urgency in my voice, it's because there's a reason. I will never ask you to do something like, move out of the way if there is not a reason. And it was something that we didn't get right away, but we worked on that. And there were times where we were in a circumstance where it was like, step back or do something because a car was coming through or whatever. And we built trust together because I made it fair. I made it reasonable. I said to him, I will never ask you to do something as a joke or whatever. It will only ever be for safety. And we have that back and forth now as an adult. Hi, Brian. So glad that you're here. So making it fair, building that trust, building that connection. Okay, let's go on to number 6. Set boundaries for people who are around your child. I think this is critical. I think until your child has the ability to set their own boundaries, we have a responsibility. I mean, we're coming up on the holidays, right? And, you might have a child who's a big hugger, and they may love a hug. And so you can say to your family, hey, my child is a hugger, and, I really want for you to hug my child. I'm just going to ask you to ask him or her before you hug them if you can have a hug. But they will very likely say yes and hug you because they love hugs. And you are that clear so that you go to Thanksgiving dinner, and when Aunt Betsy is there and you remind her, hey, we're working on boundaries, so will you do me a favor and ask him before you hug him? It's a small thing, but I think it's absolutely critical. And if your child is not a hugger, that you say that as well. That you say to people, listen, my child is not a hugger. You are welcome to ask him if he would like to hug you. And there is a possibility that he will say yes, but more than likely he will say no because he's not a hugger. So I'm going to ask you to respect that boundary. And then you got to be on that, right? I think that by doing that, you set up an environment where people understand that you are on the job and that your child has thoughts and opinions and that they should not override them. Now, there are people who don't understand boundaries and will override them. But I think we're talking about that on the next slide. But I had boundaries for anybody who came in my house. And we had behavior technicians, we called them therapists back then, ABA therapists who would come into our house, and I had a laundry list of things I would say to them. And the first one was, don't ever tell my child he's wrong when he's right. I said, I don't care what you're working on. And now eventually we had a lesson where we were learning advocacy where they would do that. And I was aware of that. And we had made him aware of it. We had said, sometimes they're going to deliberately ask you something that you should say no to because we want you to practice saying no. That's a pretty high level skill. And we didn't do that until he understood that. But we did teach him that. But we did it mindfully and aware of his feelings so that he would know and practice it. Right? But it's important to set those boundaries, and especially around the holidays when you're going to be around people who don't know how to be around your child at this stage. Your child has grown since the last time they saw them. They might be different. Fill people in. Tell everybody, here are the boundaries. This is what my child, likes. This is what my child doesn't like. Please take that into consideration. And everyone should be asking before they touch your child. I'm sorry, but I think that that's a thing for absolutely everyone and every child. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Number 7, we're running out of time. Stick up for your child's boundaries always, and your child, period. I would love to say I got this 100% perfectly right. I did not. But I got it right enough that I don't beat myself up too badly about it. But if your child says, no, let's not push them, whatever it is. It's hard because sometimes you're like, is it just, that they're afraid and I don't want them to be stuck in fear? Like this is a lot of gray area. But I think it's really important to stick up for your child as often as you can and as in front of them as you possibly can. And if your child is, for instance, especially if it's somebody wanting to hug them and they're saying no, and, Aunt Beatrice is like, oh, he won't mind. No, stick up for your child. Say, Aunt Beatrice, I'm going to ask you not to do that. Is Aunt Beatrice going to feel bad and say things? Yeah, probably. But you know what? Be on the side of your child. Absolutely. Brian says, small, actually large issues that we will begin ASAP. A CF diet for our son. ASD problems stimming have exploded the last few months, and he's sunk into a zero interaction mindset and scripting. Hugs for all. GFCF. I would love to hear positive stories. So, Brian, I just want to tell you that we did GFCF, and not everybody sees an immediate bang for their buck, but we did. Um, and there are a lot of families that will tell you that, and there are some families who will tell you it just didn't make a difference. And I have to listen to that and say that it's not a one size fits all. But I do know that enough parents have said that's what a huge difference it made, that I want to encourage you to go 100% in for it and commit to at least 3 months. A lot of times when I see the families who are like, we just didn't see it, I want to say they weren't always 100% clear if they had been able to do it without infractions for 3 months. So I think that that's a really important baseline. Anita, hi. So thrilled that you're here. Let's move on to number 8. Teach your child about levels of friendship. So quick story, when they were teaching this to my son, and levels of friendship is a pretty amazing lesson. It's in skills, but it's a pretty, you can figure it out for yourself that there are different levels of friendship. Like we're all friends on Facebook, right? But that doesn't mean that I know when your birthday is. It doesn't mean that I could come over to your house and just let myself into your house. So we use examples with my son from my life and my husband's life about what kind of friends and how close and what constitute a relationship in which you can feel that you can trust somebody. But there was this amazing thing horrible thing, but amazing things came out of it, that there was a little boy that my son really liked to play with. And I want to say this was first grade. And they would go out at recess time and he was always going to play with his friend. But how his friend wanted to play with him was that his friend would push him to the ground and he would grab he had a hood that had the little things, the cords, and this friend would grab the cords and try to choke my son. That he thought that was fun. Now, I don't know what was going on in that little boy's home. I don't know, but that was his way of, we're having a good time. And it was not okay. And that little boy was talked to about that. By the way, we cut the tags from my son's thing, which I encourage everybody to do, because the hood still works. It just won't pull tight and you can't be choked with it. But my son every day would say, I want to play with that little boy. And every day the boy would do something. He would push him, he would shove him, he would knock him down. This was the way this little boy played. And they kept working with the little boy to say, that's not the way you play with your friend. But what we taught my son was that if somebody is hurting you, to say, stop, you're hurting me. And that if it is a friend and you say, stop, you're hurting me, and the friend does not stop, then they are not your friend. Who? I heard them teach that to my son and I went, oh my goodness, I don't know this. If your friend is hurting you and you say, stop, you're hurting me, and they keep going, they are not your friend. It was so sad, and he cried when he realized then, this little boy is not my friend, and he cried. And I was in the next room crying, realizing that I had a friend right then that was not a friend. That I had said, could you please stop doing this? It's hurting me and my family, and they continued to do it. And the realization of, oh no, this person is not my friend was hard. Anyway, this is important stuff for our kids to learn. It's important stuff for us to learn and model. So teaching them levels of friendship. We're about out of time. Let's go to 9. Give your child choices always, even when it's 2 things that they don't want. So you need to get them in the car, and we're trying to gain compliance with the car. We say in a calm voice and a calm demeanor, do you want to get in the car and have your, excuse me, you want to have your iPad in the car? Oh, man. Or do you want to get in the car and we'll listen to Kids Bops, right? And they're like, I don't want to get in the car. I know you don't want to get in the car. Would you like to get in the car and listen to Kids Bops, or would you like to get in the car and listen to this? Now, we have to make it fair. Let's not forget that. Hold on one second. Excuse me. Oh, my goodness. We have to make it fair for them. There has to be some, because sometimes you have to go and you have to get in the car, right? And it's your agenda, but we have to make it fair for them. We have to make it worthwhile. But we can still give them choices while we're asking them to do something and make it fair in some way. Hopefully you understand that, because I got to go on. Number 10, listen to your child's cues. I love the lecturer who said to me, children vote with their hands and their feet. They always, and so I got a picture with a baby with hands and the feet. They're always telling us, even when they're not able to vocally tell us, I don't want to do that. They will pull back. We need to notice and listen to that. We may not understand why they aren't wanting to do that thing, but it is our job to be responsive to that. And when you build trust with a child by noticing and saying, I see that you don't want to do that. Let's go over here. Let's talk about it. Sometimes you can talk them through the fear. Sometimes you can't. But if you are listening to your child, you will be building trust. It isn't just about the end result of compliance. It's about being in a place where you and your child have trust. And that's how you get the right kind of compliance. Thank you for the bless yous. I'm so sorry that I'm sneezing and dripping and my eyes are running. I'm allergic to something. I've touched something I shouldn't have. But anyway, this is a ground floor for a discussion that's really about you and your child and about what you can withstand and what your child can withstand. So I hope that was helpful. On Monday, wait till you hear, we're having Dave Humphrey back on the show. He is coming to us from the P2I project, which is a project that is particularly mindful of and doing research about from conception through early childhood, about how to lower incidences of chronic diseases that seem to be on the rise with children, things like childhood cancer, childhood diabetes, but also, is autism something that is a foregone genetic conclusion, or can we alter environmental toxins so that at the very least, we do not get the more disabling aspects of autism? And you won't believe what they found out. If you are pregnant or thinking about having another child and you are concerned about will you have multiple children with autism, you will not want to miss this show. It is really amazing information. So join us on Monday for that. And then we'll be back with Ask Dr. Doreen on Tuesday. Until then, give your kiddos a hug for me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now. If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram for important updates. And please download our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much. See you next time.